Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be talking about interval inversions. The concept of inversion in music theory is an important one and gets used for a whole lot of different topics, but it's first introduced when we talk about intervals. So make sure you've already watched the first two videos on intervals so you know how to identify and write them before you try to invert them. So to invert anything in music means to take the lower note and to move it up an octave. So if I take this first interval that I have here, F to C, first of all, we can label that as being a perfect fifth. Again, check out the other interval videos if that doesn't make sense to you. Now, to invert means to take this F and move it up an octave so that it would go up there. So then I rewrite this interval. The C stays in place, and the F goes up here. Okay, so now, after I inverted it, what did this interval become? Well, it went from being a perfect fifth to a perfect fourth. Okay, that's interesting. We'll hold on to that for a second. Next one, E to A is a perfect fourth. To invert means to take the bottom note and move it up an octave. So when I rewrite this, the original top note stays where it was. So A stays here. E goes here. Now reevaluate that and we get a perfect fifth. So a pattern evolving here. It seems like perfect intervals, when they get inverted, stay perfect, and fourths, when they get inverted, become fifths, and fifths, when they get inverted, become fourths. So we're going to make a chart here on the right side of all these different relationships when we invert things. But for now, let's keep going. In bass clef, A to C sharp is a major third. To invert means to move the lower note up an octave. So now this is C sharp to A. And that is going to be, let's see, generically some kind of sixth. The major sixth would be A sharp. I have A natural, so it means the top note's been lowered. It becomes a minor sixth. Okay, now let's look at the next one, G to E. G to E is a major sixth. E is the sixth note of the G major scale. To invert means to do that. So now I have E to G, some kind of third. G sharp would be the major third. I have G natural, so it means the top note's been lowered by a half step, so it's a minor third. Okay, can I pull a pattern out of this? Well, it looks like major intervals, when they're inverted, become minor. And thirds, when they're inverted, become sixths. Okay, patterns emerging. Let's try the next set down here, starting with E flat to F in treble clef. E flat to F is going to be a major second. Then I'll invert, and I get this, some kind of seventh. E natural would be the seventh note of F. I have E flat, which means it's been lowered, minor seventh. Okay. D to C sharp is a major seventh. Invert, some kind of second. D sharp would be the second note of C sharp, so I have D natural, so it means it's been lowered by a half step, so it's minor. Okay, so it looks like the rule that minor and major inverting between each other is holding for these examples, but the new pattern I can extrapolate here is that seconds and sevenths invert between each other. Any second inverted will become a seventh. Any seventh inverted will become a second. Okay, this is good. All right, let's look at this next set in bass clef, G to G. That is going to be a perfect octave, G to G. When I invert, that means the lower G is going to go up an octave and be right next to the upper G. Okay, what do we call it when we have two notes that occupy the same line or space? It's a unison or a prime or first. And because it's the same note, it's perfect. So perfect unison. This holds from the rule up a little bit, right? That perfect stays perfect. But what this might add here is that unisons and octaves invert between each other. Let's see if that holds here. Now I start with a perfect unison, B to B. Neither one of them is lower, so swing one of them up the octave is fine. And now I get B to B, which is a perfect octave. Perfects stay perfect, and unisons and octaves invert between each other. Last set, G to C sharp. That is going to be an augmented fourth. Invert, C sharp stays the same, G goes up here. Some kind of fifth now. C sharp to G sharp would be the perfect fifth. So that means the top note's been lowered. So that means it's diminished fifth. Okay, now I got a fifth over here. That the perfect fifth would be D flat to A flat. I have A natural, so that means it's an augmented fifth. Invert A to D flat. That is going to be some kind of fourth. A to D would be perfect. We have D flat, so it's diminished. See the pattern on this one now? Augmented and diminished intervals invert between each other. And fourths and fifths again. Also, you should notice here this one. An augmented fourth and a diminished fifth, those are both tritones. So what that means is if you invert a tritone, it stays a tritone. No matter how many times you invert it, it stays a tritone. Okay, let's look at some example questions. Okay, and I rewrote the chart here on the right side so you can see that perfect goes to perfect, major and minor, augmented and diminished, and then all the numerical measurements. So really, you can do this with anything. A minor second goes to a major seventh. An augmented octave would invert to a diminished unison. Just work both sides of the chart, quality and numerical measurement, and you can figure anything out. A perfect fifth goes to a perfect fourth. Even weird ones like an augmented seventh would invert to a diminished second. Just work both sides of the chart. So what I think we should do here is, and this is how you'll be asked about it typically, is to label the first interval, invert it, and then label the second. So for example, this first interval A to B flat is a minor second. If I invert it, I get this. And I can analyze the second interval and know that B flat to A is a major seventh, or I just know that minor seconds invert to major sevenths. Okay, try 2 through 6. You can pause the video and then we'll go over them. D flat to F is a major third. When I invert, I know it will become a minor sixth. A to D is a perfect fourth. When I invert, it becomes a perfect fifth. A to F sharp is a major sixth. When I invert, it becomes a minor third. E to D is a minor seventh. When I invert, that becomes a major second. E flat to B natural is an augmented fifth. When I invert, it becomes a diminished fourth. That's how interval inversions work. Now, you'll be asked just straight up about interval inversions, but one way that some students like to apply the use of interval inversions is to help them write descending intervals. And I'll show you what I mean about that over here. So say I asked you to write down a minor seventh from E. A lot of times students have trouble writing descending intervals. It's just harder to think about. So instead of writing down a certain interval, you could think what that note is up the inversion of the interval, but just write it in the lower octave. So instead of writing down a minor seventh, I could think, well, what is up a major second? Minor seventh, major second are inversions, right? What note is up a major second? But instead of writing that note above, I would just write it below and my answer would still be correct. So for a lot of students, it's easier to think, what's the second note of E major rather than what's down a minor seventh. E is the lowered seventh note of what major scale. So up a major second from E is F sharp. I just put the F sharp here. That's down a minor seventh. And I can play this game all day with the rest of them. Instead of thinking down a minor sixth, I could think up a major third. Third note of D flat is F, but I just write it underneath. That's down a minor sixth from D flat. Instead of down a major seventh, I could think up a minor second. Up a minor second from G sharp is A. Write it in the lower octave and I'm done. Down a diminished fifth from E, I could think up an augmented fourth, which would give me A sharp, but I just write the A sharp down here. And I'm done. So that is how you use interval inversions to answer questions just about inverting intervals and what they become when they're inverted, and its application to helping you to write descending intervals.